Awaken your shadow. The truth sets some people free. It offends everyone else. By Seth, the Red Neo, Cherupak.
Part 2. The Rise of Somatic Axiology.
New header, The Rise of Somatic Axiology. Now that we've laid a foundation, it's time to turn this knowledge and revelation into action and growth. The shadow work method in this chapter isn't about learning. It's not even about doing. It's about becoming. Becoming requires commitment, coherence, and transformation. It calls for the kind of inner alchemy that turns insight into identity and revelation into rhythm. But this kind of transformation is rare, and that rarity exposes a systemic challenge in the landscape of modern growth culture. In a world rich with methods and modalities, many seekers confuse intensity with integration. I call this denial of the practical side of spirituality, spiritual tourism. Spiritual tourists move from one tool, teacher, or technique to another, chasing bliss states instead of embodying the changes they seek. Most teachers and guides are doing the best they can with what they've been given. Many have never encountered or been taught a framework that supports deep integration. With no clear path to metabolize insight into identity, even profound experiences turn into fleeting memories rather than lasting transformation. Spiritual bliss is interpreted as breakthrough. Emotional catharsis is mistaken for character change. Sacred technologies are consumed as novelty rather than nourishment. In the absence of true integration, the seeker becomes a wanderer, enchanted by experiences but unchanged by them. Whether it's breath work, plant medicine, energy healing, or meditation, any modality becomes spiritual tourism when it's used to create a spiritual experience without a lasting spiritual transformation. A tourist seeks peak moments. A practitioner cultivates embodied momentum. A creator walks the path of metamorphosis. The shadow work method in this book affects lasting change through growth, using a truly holistic method that I call somatic axiology. Somatic because it affects the body, the breath, and the embodied self. Axiology because it addresses the structure of value, how we perceive, assign, and embody worth, meaning, and sacred hierarchy, grounding our practices in the dimensions of formal axiology introduced earlier in this book. The old spiritual paradigm reveals what we've forgotten. Somatic axiology is how we remember and reintegrate our authentic self. It's the embodied path through which theory becomes truth, knowledge becomes practice, and spirituality becomes song. We now descend from concept into coherence, not to consume new wisdom, but to become it. Somatic axiology is a path for those ready to step off the carousel of stimulation and into the work of becoming, one breath, one layer, one sacred choice at a time. Somatic axiology is part of a larger lifestyle-based philosophy called natural law. Natural because it creates lasting physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual growth by leveraging natural methods and resources. Law because this method is based on timeless, universal, non-negotiable principles that are the same yesterday, today, and always. The natural law principles fall into three categories: the seven selves, derived from the seven chakras, Jungian archetypes, and human needs psychology. These are the keys to mastering the intrinsic dimension of axiology. The seven sacred contracts of incarnation. These represent the finite resources we become responsible for when we are born into the material world: time, money, connections, etc. They are the keys to mastering the extrinsic dimension. The 7 Hermetic Principles, ancient models of universal law now echoed by modern physics. These are the keys to mastering the systemic dimension. Natural law shadow work empowers you to activate and integrate your 7 selves, embody the 7 Hermetic Principles, and master the 7 sacred contracts. It does this through 3 ancient and holistic practices: breathwork, neuroplasticity, sound healing. Please set aside any impulse to assume that you already know about these things, that you're already doing them, or that they aren't that impactful. The natural law philosophy starts with dissolving the assumptions and suspending the judgments that would keep you from understanding the 21 principles or applying the 3 practices above. Breathwork, neuroplasticity, sound healing, and even shadow work have become super popular in recent years. This has raised general spiritual awareness, which is good, but it's also created a flood of oversimplified and even misleading content. Millions of content creators chase followers, attention, and income by repackaging sacred wisdom they neither understand nor respect. AI is now compounding the problem by learning from that diluted content and reteaching it in even more sanitized forms. And all of this is feeding into a much deeper cultural addiction: simplicity. This craving for simple solutions to complex problems isn't a virtue. It's a symptom of our collective identity as consumers, not creators. Simple is fine for baking cakes or replacing tires. But once you shift from consumer to creator, the impulse to seek simple solutions to a complex problem becomes a liability. When sacred wisdom is stripped for parts, diluted for virality, and reassembled by algorithms, what's left isn't medicine, it's mimicry. And mimicry never transforms. This is why so much modern spiritual content feels hollow. Creators oversimplify sacred technologies just to keep them easily digestible. But none of the miracles of human creation, agriculture, aviation, electricity, computing, are simple under the hood. They only seem simple to those who use them, not those who understand how to build, manage, or repair them. Our obsession with simplicity keeps us sheep. If we want to stop being sheep, we have to stop thinking and behaving like sheep. That's why we began this journey by realizing we are the sane living in an insane world. We exposed the architecture of distortion, saw through the matrix within and around us, and glimpsed the real self beneath the scar tissue of survival and conformity. From here, we will descend not into the mind, but into the full mind-body complex. We descend on a rescue mission for your shadow selves, with the intent of bringing them into the light of consciousness. Only then can we stop trying to play the music of our higher self through an instrument that is out of tune. We can stop chasing healing through effort and performance. We stop stacking new habits on top of old trauma. We stop ignoring the language of breath, bone, and blood through which the divine is trying to speak. Your higher self doesn't speak in words alone. It speaks in rhythms, in breath, in vibration, sensation, posture, tone, and movement. It speaks through how you carry yourself, how you connect with your feelings, how you listen, rest, walk, and speak truth into rooms that once silenced you. This is not about performance, it's not about perfection, it's about reclamation. This is the turning point in your journey, the shift from consuming truth to embodying it, from mental awareness to sacred coherence, not through force, not through hustle, but through attunement. Your body is not a machine to fix or manage. It is a sacred instrument to tune and to master. New subheader, Breath as the Language of Spirit. You've been breathing your whole life, but you probably never thought of breath as an intentional negotiation between your thinking brain and your body. Breathing is more than just taking oxygen in and breathing carbon dioxide out. Breath is a language, the first one you ever learned. Long before you learned to speak, write, or even think in words, Your body was learning how to interpret safety, danger, presence, fear, and trust through breath. And even now, it's still listening. Breath is the only physiological system that is both automatic and voluntary, which makes it the only system that can be used as a bridge between the unconscious and conscious, the seen and the unseen, the shadow and the self. Breath is the most universal language of spirit. This is the key many of us miss. Breath is how our conscious mind speaks to our body, and our bodies are always listening. We're in a constant conversation with our nervous system. When anxiety, fear, or insecurity take over our thoughts and behaviors, it's often because we don't know how to use the sacred language of breath to regain coherence. Many times we don't even realize we're speaking to ourselves when we breathe. This is why we sometimes breathe like machines, short, shallow, reactive, and then wonder why we feel anxious, ungrounded, or emotionally volatile. Here's a glimpse of how breath bridges the communication gap between our brain and our body. Shallow, rapid breathing tells your body, danger is near, brace yourself. Chaotic breathing says we're overwhelmed, shut down, or fight back. Holding your breath says, freeze, don't speak, don't feel, don't move. But rhythmic, conscious breathing says, you are safe, present, in control. Your body doesn't speak English. It doesn't care about your positive affirmations or your motivational thoughts. It listens to patterns. It listens to sensations. It listens to breath. This is why so many people can know they're safe but still feel on edge, or understand their trauma but still treat it like an active threat. This is why spiritual seekers can have blissful experiences, sound baths, meditations, psychedelic journeys, where they come away feeling healed, but fall back into the same patterns when the euphoria of that experience wears off. It also explains why changing your thinking changes nothing. It's not what you think that matters. It's what you communicate to your body through the sacred language of your breath. Your breath is the translator between your mental intention and your physical state. It's the Morse code of your nervous system. Each breath is a signal, a directive, a living pulse of information. And this is where things get powerful, because if breath is a spiritual language, breath work is spiritual authorship. It means you can speak safety into your system, you can send presence into panic, you can descend into your shadow self, not with fear, but with a message calling it into the light. Breath is the ladder between levels of self, the descent into the underworld of your disowned parts, the ascent back into clarity and integration. Every exhale brings you one step deeper into the body, one layer closer to where the fragmentation lives. This is why breath is the first pillar of somatic axiology, because before you can rewrite your patterns or reframe your story, you have to re-enter your own system, and breath is how you do it. This is a truth based in biology. Picture this. You're stressed. You're tight. Maybe you're about to speak up in a meeting or sit down for a hard conversation. Your shoulders rise. Your chest contracts. But then, almost instinctively, you take a slow breath deep into your belly and something shifts. That breath didn't just calm your mind. It sent a signal to your entire body that you were safe enough to stay present. That kind of breath, what's often called diaphragmatic breathing, pulls air deep into the lungs by expanding the belly rather than the chest. And it's powerful. Why? Because it taps directly into your autonomic nervous system, the part of you that runs beneath your thinking. Slow, full breathing stimulates the vagus nerve, a communication superhighway that connects your brain to your heart, lungs, and gut. When the vagus is activated, your system downshifts, your heartbeat steadies, your blood pressure lowers, the threat response cools down. Neuroscience tells us that deep rhythmic breathing increases heart rate variability, HRV, a measure of your body's ability to bounce back from stress. People with healthy heart rate variability are masters of their emotional states and therefore of their lives. Lowers activation in your amygdala, the part of your brain that keeps track of past pain, and searches for matching threats in your present environment, often finding them when they're not really there. Quiets the default mode network, DMN, the brain loop that spins familiar stories about who you are and what's possible. These stories can be empowering or disempowering depending on how you craft and rehearse them. More on this in the next section. This tells us three important things. If you change your breath, you can change your chemistry. If you change your chemistry, you change your state. If you can change your chemistry, you can change your story. As you'll discover in the coming chapters, this simple process will change everything. Breathwork is the sacred interface that makes this possible. It's a control panel your higher self uses to tune the instrument of your body. It's how you stop reacting to life and start relating to it. It's how you stop playing someone else's survival song and start composing your own. Breath is how you turn the factory back into a temple, not through performance, not through force, through presence, through rhythm, through learning to speak the sacred language your body was built to understand. Before you can build new patterns, you must first re-enter the sanctuary, and breath is the doorway. Every inhale is a step inward. Every exhale is a welcome home. New subheader, Sound as the Language of Embodiment. If breath is the language of spiritual growth and thought is the code that translates it into belief and identity, then sound is the energy that turns belief and identity into embodied action and habits. This marks the third critical distinction between spiritual tourism and spiritual growth. Organized sound, the definition of music, isn't just a tool for emotional expression, it's a means of regulating your nervous system. Think about the last time you were in a conversation where you had something important to say, but your body wouldn't let you say it with confidence. Your hands shook, your throat locked, you smiled instead. That moment didn't come from confusion, it came from fear buried in the body. Your mind knew what to do, but your nervous system wasn't ready to support it. That's the hidden architecture of sabotage, the body overriding the soul not out of malice but out of memory. Emotional regulation isn't about calming down. It's about creating the inner conditions that let truth move through you without breaking you. It's the capacity to stay grounded when old emotional weather patterns rise. Most people don't sabotage because they don't know better. They sabotage because their nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to allow the new truth in. That's the threshold of real transformation, when your body becomes capable of holding emotion without collapsing into outdated or self-sabotaging patterns of thought and action. This is the difference between sound healing as a tool for creating experiences and sound healing as a tool for spiritual transformation. Sound healing is not a metaphor, it's a mechanism. Modern scientific research increasingly confirms a fact ancient cultures have long known and practiced. Vibration shapes biology. In 2011, Dr. Stephen Porges introduced the polyvagal theory, which revealed how vocal practices like humming, toning, and chanting stimulate the vagus nerve. This stimulation shifts the body from a sympathetic fight-or-flight state into a parasympathetic state associated with safety, presence, and restoration. Sound isn't a placebo, it's a portal. You felt this before, maybe without realizing it. Maybe you were driving and a song came on that took you back to a childhood memory. Suddenly your shoulders relaxed. Or maybe you were spiraling after a long day and a friend or lover spoke to you with calm certainty, and your breath came back. In both of these examples, you didn't decide to feel safe. Your body responded to a signal it recognized. Steady rhythm, grounded tone, familiar resonance. These are moments of emotional regulation in action, when sound bypasses the story in your head and brings your body back home. It's important to note that these moments usually come from external sources, but what if you could generate that signal from within? That's what the integration of breathwork, neuroplasticity, and sound healing makes inevitable emotional regulation that's intentional, trainable, and embodied. This, as you'll soon realize, is the secret to mastering your mind-body instrument, and transforming your shadow self into your higher self. You may not know the term brainwave entrainment, but you've likely felt its effects. Ever find yourself calming down during a walk with a steady rhythm, or slipping into a kind of focused trance while listening to rain? That's not just a change in mood, that's your brain syncing to external sound. Here's a more familiar example. You're walking to the rhythm of music in your headphones. After a few minutes, your breath, your steps, even your thoughts begin to match the beat. That's your brain locking into an external rhythm, a process called entrainment. Auditory neuroscience has confirmed this. When rhythmic sound is introduced, your brain's electrical patterns, its brain waves, begin to align with those rhythms. These waves operate at different frequencies. Delta waves, 0.5 to 4 hertz, deep, dreamless sleep. Theta waves, 4 to 8 hertz, meditation, creative immersion. Alpha waves, 8 to 12 hertz, calm, focused attention. When sound frequencies match these rhythms, your brain follows. Researchers like Tatum and Wabe have explored binaural beats, where two slightly different tones are played in each ear. The brain merges them, generating a third phantom tone. When this tone aligns with brainwave frequencies like alpha or theta, it fosters states of clarity, calm, or flow. For instance, people listening to theta beats often report feeling more relaxed, more creative, and emotionally rebalanced. But the effects of sound go beyond the brain, they reach the body. In one study, Dr. David King worked with individuals diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, many of whom struggle with muscle rigidity and impaired movement. Instead of traditional medication, King introduced vibroacoustic therapy, low-frequency sound waves applied through vibrating chairs. These tones aren't heard as much as felt, like standing near a bass speaker. The vibrations stimulate mechanoreceptors, sensory nerves that detect pressure and motion. The outcomes were striking: improved motor function, reduced tension, and greater emotional calm. These bodies weren't responding to ideas or beliefs. They were responding to frequency. Imagine lying in one of those chairs, a deep hum pulsing through your spine. No words, no analysis, just a wave of vibration saying, "You can let go now." That's what happens when frequency meets a body's unmet need. So the next time someone says, "Just breathe," when you're overwhelmed, remember, sometimes the breath needs a rhythm to ride. Sometimes your body needs a signal it can trust, a sound that says, "You're safe now." And this is only the beginning. Beyond therapy, sound, when used consciously, awakens what we call your internal resonance matrix, a vibrational map of the 7 selves. Each self carries a sacred need and a unique neural emotional signature. These selves aren't just linguistic archetypes. They're functional frequencies that make up the architecture of your full being. And when one is ignored or distorted, it doesn't go quiet, it falls out of tune. Picture each self as a string on a sacred instrument. When tuned, they create harmony between your thoughts, feelings, body, and spirit. But when a string is pulled too tight, overcompensating, or left too loose, neglect, the sound becomes dissonant. You might call it anxiety, burnout, shame, or addiction, but what it really is vibrational discord, a chord in your system seeking resolution. This is where sound becomes both diagnosis and remedy. Vocal practices can activate multiple regulatory systems, stimulating the vagus nerve, synchronizing heart rate, modulating breath, and aligning neural rhythms. In short, sound tunes the system. Take the simple practice of toning the vowel sound A while breathing deeply. Studies show this reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, while increasing parasympathetic tone and interoception. Friedman, 2010. Apply this to the sovereign self, whose need is validation and whose wound is shame, and the toning becomes more than soothing. It becomes restorative, a way to reclaim the self's natural tone. This is when sound healing becomes the language of self-regulation, not in concept but in nervous system function. As you'll soon see, each of the seven selves can be accessed, healed, and embodied through the triad of breath, thought, and sound. Sound healing, in particular, is foundational. When a sacred need goes unmet, your nervous system doesn't just falter, it vibrates. Pain becomes the sound of dissonance. Healing becomes the music of reconnection. These aren't spiritual accessories, they're strategies. They help the divine feminine translate what the divine masculine proclaims when rehearsing your identity scripts. Breath carries intention. Thought encodes belief. Sound carries identity. And that identity doesn't land until your body is able to hold it. This is the shift from performance to presence, from mimicry to integration, from spiritual tourism to real spiritual growth. Sound is how the body knows you're telling the truth, and until your tone, breath, and presence align, no amount of insight will stick, because your nervous system isn't listening for brilliance, it's listening for safety. And that's the doorway into coherence, the beginning of the upward journey for your seven selves, rising from their place in the shadows, not as disembodied ideas, but as living intelligences whose underlying needs will either keep you chained in darkness or become the very pathway that carries you upward toward the light.
End of Part 2 of Chapter 4 of Awaken Your Shadow by Seth Cherapak.